Okay, so a quick Shadow Council session today with Gregory and me, Shane. And this was all kicked off because Russell in one of our group chats put up the perennial unkillable question about whether people believe in free will or not. And Gregory and I both kind of rolled our eyes and threw up our hands and got contrarian and argumentative about it. And then we started chatting and we got onto the idea like, is philosophy done? Like, is it finished? Is it complete? Or is it possible to complete it if it hasn't happened already? And what does it mean when, like, a cornerstone of like human endeavor reaches a point where people are like, I think we've kind of run out of things to do. Like, how do you call it as a species, as a civilization? How do you say, yep, we're done. Let's go and play in the flowers and do something else? So I want to throw over to Greg first. You start us off. Tell us what you think about all of this idea.
To have the view of a completed and structuralized philosophy, it implies that the philosophy itself is too narrow, too personal, too human, all too human. Both Nietzsche reference and unreferenced there. Some something rhetorical. I say from how language works, a play of words, grammatical seduction, or an audacious decision to have want so, have truth as the primary concern and drive for your knowledge, and it's seriously being baptized as your faith.
Hmm.
To me, that's, or not to exclude me, objectively, that's the faith in that's the fundamental faith in the antithetical values of life,
Hmm.
of a completed and systematic philosophy. And with this, I'd say rant episode and not a structuralized episode, where it ties with the other cliche question of what is the meaning of life.
Hmm.
When the question was first introduced to the human conscience, or not an ant or an animal or a sentient being outside the earth or the universe of this question, because of humans' obsession with consciousness and responsibility. The meaning of life was once prolific and profound. Now it's evolved to be a grain of a grain of salt. Its minimal flavor, its sourness, and its drying of the ever flowing and eternal water of humans.
Mm.
I've reworded the question to what determines the conditions of one's life to be valuable, not of what is the meaning of life.
Hmm. Hmm.
One can have Chesterton. Chesterton is a Catholic priest. His view of life was in the aim of projecting the will of God onto humans, or having this intellectual foresight of how one can measure absolutely and completely of nature to from the first cause. And what he labeled as the first cause, or causa prima in Latin, is God. And I say to myself, well, Chesterton, you're committing a logical fallacy. You agree that with subservience to God, humans are granted free will. But if the first cause is of God's creation of the world and universe, that implies a deterministic view. So, which side of the coin are you, in totality, advocating for? The determinism or indeterminism? If
Hmm.
it's if it's determinism, then man can't feel guilt, nor the conscious impact of guilt that will unsubjugate man. But
Oh,
man is subjugated from free will.
I want to pin you down on the question though. Do
Yeah.
you think philosophy could be completed if it's theoretically possible to like think all of the possible philosophical thoughts, organize them, put them all in a big dusty book, and say we're done? Do you think that is theoretically possible and even practically possible for a human species to recognize that it's reached that point?
No. It would imply that reality has a beginning and conclusion with a complete and systematic philosophy. Thus, that's the Christianization and secularization of said philosophy. One person I think of is Hegel, how he used the dialectic in the philosophy of history. He ventures through this existential view of the dialectic where in the time of judgment day that it would be the conclusion of history. We would vanish. And I'd say that's a fatalistic move of thinking this universe is immutable. That stems from from man's pride of valuing the kernel of consciousness. Consciousness itself is conceptualized, simplified, and that and bashed with judgment, measurement, comparison, and condemnation of ourself. To continue answering the question, and I would say the same thing to you. Of well, after I continue the question, I'd say it to you. A totality of of a philosophy we're witnessing it now on the political and religious scale, and in a secular scale too,
Mm.
with uniformity in China. One example, Mao Zedong and the Great Leap Forward, and after his death of what I would term as concentration camps, not in the Nazi and Italian fascist sense of, or the American sense of concentration camps, but the concentration camps of re-education,
Mm.
reassurance, and or the totalitarian sense of realignment or consciousness.
Mm.
That's one view of how a complete philosophy is
So let me
constru-
let me get this clear. You're saying that human society and culture and probably human biology changes at a sufficient rate that philosophy is always kind of trying to play catch up with those innovations. Like, do you think philosophy could ever get ahead of biology and culture, or does it sometimes get ahead? Does it lead that dynamic?
it doesn't, it's not in reverse or forward, but in parallel from with how the century and culture is moving.
Hmm.
The one rare time philosophy was in in innovation was the era of the Macedonian Empire, the golden age of Islam, the Greco-Roman era, including Marco Polo and two other merchants' journey to China amid the reign of Kublai Khan, the Kong of China. Uh, I'd say
I think I agree with what you're saying there, that there's an interplay between like philosophy changes the world and then the world changes philosophy. There's a dialogue back and forth between those aspects of reality.
another part is how one views philosophy. Is one viewing philosophy with the common definition of the love of wisdom, and people begin arguing of, well, what is wisdom? How can you love it? Or what is love? And what is the word in between love and wisdom? Of. What is of? I, I I don't converse with those idiotic people when they're too meticulous of every single word in that sentence. I'm staring at the Jordan Peterson lovers
Hmm.
and or ass kissers,
I
which that
Well,
yeah.
I wonder if it's something a bit like chemistry, that there's like a basically it all hinges around the discovery of the atom as a science and an art. And once atoms were understood and there was a sudden explosion where the periodic table was filled out and organized in a relatively short period of time, and then like things became recognizable as chemistry rather than the pre-chemistry kind of alchemical fumblings that had been going on for centuries. But you very quickly reach a point where you've discovered all of the elements, and there's a limited number of elements that you're going to encounter in everyday life, and you can go to ever more uh, extreme conditions to try and create bigger and bigger atoms, but they fall apart in like a millionth of a second. So they're not actually that practically useful. And so that part of chemistry is basically finished in terms of discovering all of the atoms. Like we've pretty much done everything that the universe can do. So I think there is, and I think there's parallels with philosophy, that there's certain aspects of it, of what it can be, have been exhausted. But where chemistry went on then is basically how do you take those 100 basic elements and combine them in all sorts of different ways? That's where you get a combinatorial explosion of things to investigate. And we kind of see this, like sociology is like, how gender theory applies to like Afghani merchants in the 14th century. Like they find weird combinations of things and try and like dig around for, unexpected dynamics or connections. I think that's probably what's happened with philosophy, that the foundation is pretty much established, but now we're going through that kaleidoscope of combinations and permutations of how those basic ideas can be
Mhm.
shuffled and applied to the world.
That kaleidoscope realities of the manifestation of how indirect and frequent a collection and storage of energy is being released. I I see with a higher lens or glasses or spectacles, depending on how you see,
Or a
is the
monocle. Use a monocle.
a monocle, a singular one, or be Odin and have a singular eye, but absorbing double the wisdom. Oh, that'd be a great metaphor to use for another episode. And the Odin's eye.
Hmm.
Um, but it's this discharge of hoarded energy, and where moments in history are influenced from that, well, are a representation of that influence of history. Napoleon's one example. I view Napoleon as a synthesis of the over higher and noble man and his nearness to the lower contemptuous and war crying many of people. To me, he's that synthesis. That's one example. Another example is of astrology. Johannes Kepler, Nicholas Copernicus, another one, Isaac Newton with mathematics, Robert Hooke. Nobody mentions Robert Hooke, but he's
Mm.
crucial. Why? The pendulum.
Yeah.
What? The
They're um
pendulum.
they're,
The
they're
pendulum.
all
Yeah,
they're all like lightning bolts that connect the clouds to the ground.
lightning bolts. Like physical representation of lightning bolts, and I
Mm.
use the word influence, which is similar to uh, chance. Chance is beyond is everything beyond control, and well, everything's independent beyond control. To view from a high bird's eye view, and the long term effect of this view of supreme powers, chance becomes unnecessary, an afterthought, because of how it integrates and sources one higher, and it becomes the resource of culture's higher excellence. This time I didn't say person,
Mm.
culture, a culture value for a higher excellence. But from this step by step arrangement of natural laws and necessities, the world, the order of rank in a world and evolution is where the breath have cometh to the culture as a creative breath, and the heavenly necessity which compels chance to dance a starry dance, as I'd love to say.
Lovely, lovely. Okay, I think I think we've done a good skip around this idea. It was kind of a silly idea, and I just wanted to have fun with it. But I think we got some good
It's
value out of it.
I concur, my brother, because it's one of these episodes I can be dynamic and show different fruits from every branch. One fruit is a grapefruit, and another one is a dragon fruit, and then there's the large fruit, the jackfruit. It's sweet inside, but prickly as a porcupine outside. It's
Hmm.
both lethal but sweet. That's similar to a woman, correct? Lethal but sweet.
I wouldn't know anything about that. I generally avoid them unless they're on four legs. With that, I think we should wrap up. Amor fati, my friend.
Amor fati.